Okay. David, if you could tap the recording button. There we are. Bonjour tout le monde and hello everyone. Oh, let me do this one more time. There we are. Now everyone started. Bonjour tout le monde and hello everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this important event, exploring the opportunity for Indigenous peoples in advanced air mobility. I'm Chris Howe, and I'm the lead operating officer for CAAM, which is the Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Consortium, which is bringing together government, industry, and academia in pursuit of a zero emissions, sustainable, equitable, and economically profitable advanced air mobility ecosystem. It usually would be our executive director, J.R. Hammond, up here on the screen, though I am so grateful to be able to lead this event and hand off the reins to Tira, our host, in just a few moments. Before we get started, we need to acknowledge that we are hosting this digital event on the unceded and traditional ancestral territories of the Coast Salish peoples. Those include the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish First Nation, but include many different groups from all over the coast. Our ongoing work at CAAM spans across hundreds of ancestral territories across Canada, and collectively as settlers, we and I need to recognize that this is our duty and our responsibility to decolonize, to reconciliate, and build the equitable and inclusive use of our future air resources. In speaking with our host for today, we recognize that everyone is arriving into this space with different understandings of advanced air mobility. So I wanted to take a moment to frame advanced air mobility before I hand it over to Tira. Now, the aircraft that you've seen or may have heard of may look like fancy, shiny helicopters or updated fixed-wing aircraft. And when I came into this space, I kind of wondered, what really is the difference? Well, I learned that advanced air mobility is kind of at the intersection between drones and commercial aviation. And as advanced air mobility grows, it may actually include both of those. But right now, what sets it apart is that it really allows us to access communities and to go places where previously it wasn't really feasible to allow us to fly. That can be moving cargo, services, or people all across different communities, one step at a time. When we talk about timelines, the developers in the US of these vehicles are looking to certify their aircraft in around 2024. Though our goal at CAAM is to help bring this industry to life with commercialized operations by 2030. Now you may be wondering, 2030, why are we having this conversation now? And I've learned as a white colonizing settler and a person of privilege that the status quo will prevail if those who have privilege maintain it and don't make a change. So I, in my relative power, need to have this conversation now. And I think we need to have this conversation now in order to shift the way that we think about this technology and the way it is used and who it really benefits. When we think about capacity, I like to think about advanced air mobility as ranging from 2 to around 19 seats in the near future. What you see here is an electric heart aerospace aircraft that really unlocks the capacity to move from community to community without having to go through an urban center, as today is usually the norm. When you think about use cases, I like to think about in the near term, we can think about delivering medical supplies such as PPE and prescription drugs. We can move time-sensitive cargo like organs or COVID vaccines and move between communities to really unlock that mobility that previously was a lot more difficult for communities to achieve. I really want, before we go into this section, I really want to take a moment to highlight Tira. As you may have just seen, jump onto the screen there. Tira has really been a light in my life in exploring these uncomfortable conversations and making me feel safe in exploring them, knowing that whatever I know is good enough and that my efforts to try and learn more and engage in these conversations is all that's needed. I'm really hopeful that all of you today will be willing and open to engaging in this bridge building exercise and witnessing a conversation that I feel is long overdue. With that, I'd love to pass it over to Tira to begin this conversation.
Amazing. Thank you, Chris. You always just make my whole being feel settled and grounded with the kindness of your words and the warmth that you share your voice with. Thank you. Tansei Kioao, hello to all of you. My name is Tira Johnny Jean Fraser, actually. My middle name, Johnny Jean, I'm now proud of, I wasn't always. And I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm the lead executive with Iskwew Air. And for those of you that don't know, Iskwew is a Cree word for woman. And at Iskwew Air, we see ourselves very much as the bridge between traditional air transportation and the sustainable transportation of the future, and creating a place of belonging for everyone. And most importantly for this conversation, this is like going to be the best conversation ever to have, like advanced air mobility, which is my favorite topic, with Indigenous peoples and all peoples that are interested in seeing Indigenous peoples reflected and leading in this space. And as you see on the screen there, we want to reimagine, rematriate, and rebuild an air transportation sector that is centers equity and centers, of course, sustainability. We must walk more softly on Mother Earth, and Indigenous worldview and wisdom in the system is how we will do that. So we have so many exciting folks joining us in this conversation. Welcome to the conversation. And we will be truly having a emergent conversation that all of you in the audience will have the opportunity to be witnesses to, and to learn from all of these awesome knowledge holders and keepers. So welcome, and perhaps what we can do is begin with an introduction, so folks know a little bit about who you are. And then I have a whole bunch of ideas about where the conversation can go around where is the opportunity, Indigenous peoples in advanced air mobility. So perhaps share a little bit about yourself and just a little bit about where you see the opportunities. And Rocky, can we start with you?
Sure. Sam and Tanakweo, thank you, creator, for this day. Aintha Theuston. My traditional name is Theuston. My English name is Rocky James. I'm Coast Salish. I'm from the Penelakut tribes, and I'm calling in from Penelakut Island. I'm the sole proprietor of Salish Social Policy Design and Practice, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Leanne.
Thank you. I'd like to first start by acknowledging that I am fortunate to be calling from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, in which I am so honored and glad to be able to reside in such beautiful lands. My name is Layani. I am the program coordinator at Indigenous Clean Energy, and I'm currently working in a capacity building program for Indigenous youth. And to me, I think it's really important to be having those conversations and facilitating spaces like this in such an important sector and interaction with Indigenous voices and Indigenous leaders, moving forward towards a more sustainable and equitable future for all of us. Thank you.
Beautiful. Matthew.
Although my webcam is not working this afternoon, I am honored to be here, and I am grateful to be on the unceded and uncertain territory of the Algonquin for this conversation today. I am the National Training Coordinator at the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, a national Indigenous organization for the Indigenous Skills and Employment Training Program. There are 110 programs across Canada. It is my responsibility, duty, and honor to know every single one of those. that provide labor market opportunities to all Indigenous, on reserve, off reserve, Western, Eastern Métis, Northern, Southern Inuit, through skills training, through funded employment, through wage subsidies, through job research, and through partnership opportunities that can grow in the knowledge and create a pipeline for Indigenous peoples to advance their aerospace.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew. Joanne.
Saigo Siwaguego, Joanne Tababandang Yunjats, Bear Clan from the Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory here in Ontario. And I'm also the Dean of Aviation for First Nations Technical Institute. I've been with FNTI for the past, oh my gosh, long time, like almost 30 years. I'm a commercially licensed pilot, flight instructor, pilot examiner. I look after the AMO and our academic department, as well as the flight training unit. And I'm responsible for, well, other than a lot of things, to create opportunities for our youth, which we've been very successful in doing. And just, you know, creating opportunities, as well as increasing participation, not just for Indigenous people, well, of course, for Indigenous people, but we also increased the amount of women in our program as well. So we're currently up to 40%. So we're looking at building on our success with what we know and how we do it. And it's taken us a long time to get to that point, but to build on that, to create a space for our past systems and air mobility. Yeah.
Thank you, Joanne. Jacob.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Jacob Taylor, and I'm calling in from Nagojawinong, or Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, which is Mississauga Anishinaabe territory. And I'm a band member of Curve Lake First Nation. And I'm also today wearing the hat of CEO of Indigenous Aerospace. And Indigenous Aerospace was founded to empower First Nation participation in the RPAS industry. And we do that through training programs right now. And I absolutely love being a part of seeing young people get this technology in their hands. And I believe it has an immense future in encouraging young people to pursue higher education pathways, which will benefit our community development. I'm really happy to be here today alongside all these other Indigenous leaders.
Beautiful, thank you. And Darian.
Thank you, Tara. Koha'o. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jane Edwards. I am calling in from the Coast Salish Territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Semiahmoo First Nations people, the traditional unceded territory. I am the Indigenous Air Mobility Specialist here at CAAM, working to expand our work, regional Indigenous and regional engagement, expanding our work from urban centers as our work in Toronto and Vancouver. I'm really excited today to start this conversation in AAM and see how opportunities can benefit Indigenous peoples across what is now called Canada. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, welcome to the circle. My first, I think, pathway into this conversation stems from something Chris said, right? Like, okay, well, if all this isn't happening until 2030, why are we having this conversation now? And so I'd like to, hear some of your perspective on why is it important that Indigenous peoples are part of the conversation from the very beginning, and how might Indigenous peoples being a part of creating this system be important? and anyone can jump in, just like we're around the fire.
Sure. I mean, we've seen a lot of emergent industries come to Canada and pass community by, and the deleterious consequences of that. Most recently, I think in Canada, we could point to the cannabis industry and how it emerged without good community engagement. And as a result, today we have a bit of chaotic cannabis circumstance in much of our communities. And regardless of the policy outcomes of that, it does impact the profit-making abilities of the community. It hurts, the community members' ability to participate in that ongoing economy. And so for us as Indigenous leaders, it's important that we make sure that history doesn't repeat itself when history has not been so kind. And so for us being at the start of the flowing of this river, we can really start to help our people navigate it. And so that's where I feel, we're doing something of paramount importance today, is putting it as a prudent thought rather than an afterthought, which has not been the historical example in community development.
Absolutely. And there's just a small group of us. You can even feel free to leave yourself off mute so you can just really be present in the conversation, whatever feels good and right for you. And part of what's coming to my mind also is that although we're looking at this, milestone of 2024 or 2030, like it's happening now. The technology is happening now, and it's moving quickly. It feels like, to me, I feel like I'm still trying to catch up, and I'm feel like I'm in at the ground floor, and it's critical that Indigenous peoples are part of this. Other thoughts?
Yes, Tara, you make a great point. My perspective is that this is the right time to start. It doesn't matter if it's 10 years in the future, because one of the problems, and that Jacob alluded to with the cannabis, is that anything that's for Indigenous peoples has to be led by Indigenous peoples. This is the complete shift from the colonization model, where the settler or the outsider will come into the communities and have this top-down approach of speaking and lecturing. This needs to be a collaborative agreement between willing organizations, and it has to be led. The opportunity is in leadership, and by having these discussions now and taking advantage of what the labor market forecast is going to look like 10 to 15 years from now, Indigenous people won't be left behind in this industry.
Yeah, I want to see Indigenous peoples leading in this space. Truly, Indigenous peoples are the original innovators, and we have so much to offer. And even in the building of systems, right? Building of systems from a relational worldview. That's where we'll actually see sustainable systems, when they're built from that relational lens. And the wisdom of Indigenous peoples has so much to offer everyone.
Yeah, and with that, we know we've been marginalized from poor development practices, as Matthew spoke about, and we need to make it, relevant and focus on the relationship. And some of this conversation will steer towards equity. And we know many of us have probably seen that, equality, equity meme on the internet with the people watching a baseball game from behind a fence. And, equality, everyone gets the box and they all stand over, but the tiniest person in the image still can't see beyond the fence. And then we move into more of an equity realm where the tiniest person has two boxes, and then they can see over because the tall adult man in the photo doesn't need the box. And so when we're looking at, why now with Indigenous communities particularly too, is like recognizing under that equity lens that we're going to need some more of the supports and maybe take a little bit longer to get to that same positioning as everyone else's development. And so starting early and with additional resources is really important, not only just timing, but more.
Mm-hmm.
If I could jump in.
Please, at any time, just jump in with all your wisdom, all of you.
Thank you. I bring a non-Indigenous perspectives, and I'm sure there are non-Indigenous people attending this session as well. And I believe it is our duty and it is our responsibility to walk the talk. It's not just about attending a session and being in a panel. It's about asking yourself, what am I doing to walk what I'm sharing, what I am learning, and how am I contributing? As Jacob mentioned, it is a collaboration. We are all working together towards a sustainable and a common shared goal. And these conversations, they are important, they are timely, and we do have the technology, we have the tools, we have the resources. Now we have to call people to action and actually make things and make the change happen from the inside out.
You know, we use some of the language with Iskwew Air to decolonize, decarbonize, and transform the skies for the next 7 generations. And so this idea of decolonizing and allyship. Do you want to say a little bit more about like in what ways and anyone we can practice allyship as we are, you know, walking alongside this unfolding emerging technology?
I believe that for me, for example, I'm working in a capacity building program with Indigenous youth, and working as an ally is listening, active listening, understanding the Indigenous perspectives, the ways of knowing, and how a project can work best, thinking on the community side of things, listening to the Indigenous voices and Indigenous talents. As it was mentioned by Matthew earlier today, and by you too, Tira, Indigenous leaders, they are leading this change, they are leading this transition, and we are all here in collaboration to learn and to support and be also part of this transition to this sustainable future.
That's a great point. Thank you very much. I would like to build on that by saying the importance of getting an advancement now is with the Indigenous youth is that you corner the market. So when you're talking about employment opportunities and career opportunities, this is an untapped labor market. And we all know that Indigenous are underrepresented in the national labor market. But if you have this area that the rest of Canada has not caught up to or is not even thinking about, then you really can grow the communities and you can grow the perspectives. And like Tira said, instead of being on the back line, Indigenous people can be on the front line. With the right education, with the right training, and with the right supports and partnerships.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there just for a second. Those are great points, Matthew. And I think we need to, well, everybody has some great points, but I think we have to be mindful of the fact, I mean, this isn't just for youth, right? We just can't focus on that demographic. We have like a whole other untapped demographic of people with life skills, you know, people that may have been unemployed during during COVID and, looking at other opportunities as well. It's very inclusive. And if we look at what we're doing right now, it's really important to not only start this as CAAM has, but to keep the conversation going and consistently. It's just as I look at our program here, we started off as flight training 30 years ago, and the government at the time thought that, technology wasn't for Indians and that we weren't going to be successful. Well, here we go 30 years later, and people are asking us, wow, how does that happen? How did you make this work? And it's that philosophy, and it's that Indigenous way of knowing, and Indigenous worldviews and government relations, and all of the ancillary programming that goes into or to help complement the technical aspect as well, that makes it wholesome. But we also have to keep in mind, or be mindful of everybody that's on the platform as well, this is inherent like nation building. at its best, right? It's not that I just meet Tira and I never see her again, or Matthew. It's like we're always in the same circles and we're always growing because we're always representing our communities. And I think that already puts us in the leadership role. So again, we never have to ask for the leadership role. We just we take it and then we go from there. Yeah.
And thank you everybody else who has spoken so far. And I'd just like to begin by acknowledging all of the hard work that all of you have done to transform this sector already. I've been talking with Chris, and one of my main concerns is always education, just because I've been raised by teachers, and so thank you for already laying the groundwork to transform this industry. And I just think back to my introduction to this. I was taking an online course last year through the First Nations Technology Council, and Tira was facilitating a session one time, and she followed up with me after, and she reached out, and she was describing the sector to me, and she said, do you remember the Jetsons? And I said, yeah. And she said, it's that. So it's kind of like the image it brought up for me, like, that is exciting. For myself, why prepare now? It's traditional to prepare ahead of time. As somebody who's been raised in a potlatch community, it takes 4 years for us to be able to prepare for a potlatch in Coast Salish territory. You need to begin by, announcing your intentions with your elders and your community of elders spread throughout our lawn houses. And, just that preparation alone can take a year. And then, trying to gather up the resources to be able to host that potlatch and gift people and to give away as much as you possibly can. It takes time. And, so yeah, planning is traditional, strategic development is traditional, and there's a whole lot of education that is rolled up into that process. For myself, just hearing Tira define what Iskwew means, reminded me that in the Two-Spirit work that I do for Coast Salish people, there was no traditional word for Two-Spirit. And, so my mom gifted us a word at a gay men's health conference a few years ago, and it's pronounced as chwafsup. And, she's familiar with the fact that queer people like to use the rainbow to represent pride. And so she wanted to make sure that the word that she gifted us was related to the land. And just being in this discussion, it makes me realize it's related to the land and the sky because it has to do with the Northern Lights. And the definition of the word has to do with the terrain of the day. And it's to acknowledge, the trauma that Two-Spirit people go through in finding out their identity and the process of coming out. And there's a terrain in yourself, recognizing that there's some difference and there's some pain that only you're gonna know as you're growing up. And you need to be able to reconcile that. And so you need to go through some pain before you can actually get to getting down and doing the healing work and healing yourself and turning into somebody that you're proud of. And so that's kind of the traditional perspective that I can offer in my participation in this sector. And for myself, I've been doing a lot of decolonization and anti-racism work with the management teams in AIDS Vancouver Island. And, just sitting down with them, it's important to always center white supremacy in a sector, in an organization, but also to push people, to push non-Indigenous people to own their whiteness and the privilege that comes with all of that. That's a big, that takes time. so that there could be several discussions that happen up until 2030, just to lay that groundwork of like, what is white supremacy? What is whiteness? How do I own my own whiteness? And how does that affect organizational culture and organizational development? And it can take time. And, sorry, I'll wrap up in a bit, but, I just recently received a micro grant to participate in anti-racism data legislation within the province of BC. And, one of the things that comes to mind is that when they were doing the investigation into the health sector last year, myself and Queer Men's Organization were trying to advocate for the inclusion of two-spirit people. They humored us throughout most of the process, but in the end, what they told two-spirit people is that you're statistically insignificant, and there wasn't enough data to be included in the report. So this big go-on report that everybody likes to promote is still built on a foundation of homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia. So we need to be prepared to how to decolonize that in this sector as well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think here's the challenge. COVID has offered us a beautiful opportunity. The industry has been seriously impacted alongside of this emerging technology. So we can, because it will just naturally build itself back in the same way by the same people. And that is already happening. We have to disrupt that. And it's a beautiful opportunity to be able to do that. So what does, the question that arises for me is like, what does equity look like in an advanced air mobility space? And I know we haven't heard from, oh yes, Darian, I was gonna call on you because I'm like, I want to hear from Darian.
Yeah, so equity in the space is just having this conversation and starting this conversation now, because as we are developing out this industry and it's in its infancy, we can start decolonizing and start widening the federal scope to start including Indigenous and regional perspectives, because this is where the infrastructure and the technology can have huge impacts, huge benefits. As we've seen through climate change, we've been in a mode of disruption since March 2020 through COVID, last fires, and now the floods here in BC. There's huge impacts and there's huge potential for this technology, not only for Indigenous people, but for all people. And as we build out this industry, it's really, really important to start consulting early as we are developing out this industry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anyone else? I'm gonna shift topics in a minute. So if there's other things that want to be said around equity, justice, and belonging, please share your voice. Okay. Excellent. Cool. One of the things that I'm really interested in right now, I believe, I'm a Métis woman, so I am mixed heritage. I am both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. I'm colonized and colonizer, and really feel a heavy responsibility in my role to build bridges. And I believe that uplifting and co-creating the conditions for Indigenous businesses to thrive, Indigenous entrepreneurs to thrive, is one of the single most natural, swift, and effective pathways to economic reconciliation in our country. So thinking about the connection of entrepreneurship in this space, and that of course connects with our young people and everything else, as well as investment, because I think about money in a colonial sense, of course, but it grounds me to think about it as nutrients. and where the nutrients go, who has the nutrients, who's sharing the nutrients, and where the nutrients go. That's where things will flourish. So how do we flow the nutrients wisely in this industry so that Indigenous business and Indigenous-led organizations can do the important leadership work that needs to be done in this industry? What are your thoughts?
I think it needs to be supported by a policy process. As we talk about an equity lens, and equity and equality are different things. Equity is putting more resources where the resources are needed rather than everyone having the same fairness. And due to historical injustice that communities have faced, it is more challenging for us to participate in traditional sectors, let alone emergent sectors. And so for us to be able to be leaders in this space, there needs to be a recognition on the colonial side that one, it is our right to be leaders in that space for our own sovereign pathway and self-determination, and that additional resources are going to be needed for our communities to get to that human capital position where we can adequately serve ourselves within this space as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
It's really identifying and uplifting and promoting the champions in this space and recognizing that they are leaders in this space and we are developing this space, and exactly what we're doing here, we're doing it together and we're starting the conversation.
I believe that directing those nutrients towards capacity building is key. Dairy is part of our Generation Power program, in which we build this clean energy training. But at the same time, that ties me to your previous question about equity. At the same time, we're also providing equity training to employers. So there is a connection there. Youth are learning, are increasing their skills and receiving the resources and the tools they need to make those changes and lead the path forward. But at the same time, employers are also getting trained to create a brave space and not only hire those talents, but also retain them, because that's as important as.
And let's talk about talent. Let's talk about jobs and opportunities in the advanced air mobility sector. I know for sure several of you have lots of thoughts on this. Where do you see the opportunity for careers?
Jump in. I think for myself, before we can even get too far along with education or labor force participation, I think just in light of our social reality the past summer and the discovery or the confirmation of the CAAM moves 215 and the Penelakut 160 plus, I think an important part of education has to do with utilizing a trauma and violence informed approach to working with Indigenous people and trying to work on developing a framework for working with two-spirit people. And it's important to, in this reconciliation work, make sure that, the sector addresses those needs of people, because it's a very basic, nutritional factor that needs to be taken into consideration. It's hard to work with people and make successful people in this sector without making sure that they have the emotional and mental and spiritual and physical capacity to be able to participate.
That's a great point, Rocky. I totally agree. Not only do we have to raise awareness or provide training opportunities for non-Indigenous people, but we also have to provide awareness and safety around, even with our youth, to ensure that they know who they are and they know where they're coming from, and they know, the historical and contemporary issues facing Indigenous people. And going back to what you said, Tara, about the nutrition or the nutrients, I mean, that's the foundation. And I think this is what this forum is right now. This is the way I see it, is that we're building a really strong foundation to start building upon.
Beautiful. There was a conversation in the green room before we started around our youth, and I think you're right, Joanne. Like that, I want to see everyone involved in this emerging technology and in this future. And of course, I'm pretty excited about anything to do with air. And I need lots more friends. So I want to see everybody. But let's talk about the youth just for a moment. This idea of how I believe this technology can inspire a sense of wonder in our young people. Who wants to share a few thoughts about that?
Yeah, for me, it's always been an impressive feature of drone work in community is how young people get inspired towards science, technology, engineering, and math by seeing a flying robot in the sky, whether it's a cargo delivery drone or a surveillance drone. These things make young people excited about what that is. And, another area, of course, it helps when young people get these in their hand to get them out onto the land flying it and to document, some of those perspectives on the land. And so what a unique way for youth to also look at land, something that has been so important to us for so long, but something as well that we keep being confined to less and less of, as reserve land is now less than 1% of the total geographic mass in Canada. So, helping young people to get out and see the land and inspire them to pursue careers that broadly support community development is a really cool thing.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. But, and with our youth too, I see it as providing opportunities to be in that advanced stage, to be the leaders, not to be, the people that are loading the cargo in the drones and somebody else is operating it. Like that's where I am, really mindfully looking at different programs and looking at different modules to really enhance a drone training or an RPAS training program, because it's a whole, ecosystem. It's not just the technology. It's not, just the person that's loading the batteries. It's the operator. So once we start doing more of that, then our youth see themselves as operating it as well. So yeah, I agree with Jacob, and I think there's, opportunity for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I would love to see an Indigenous company or consortium being the first to operate advanced air mobility in Canada. I'm certainly rooting for that and wanting to be a part of that. But I also see like Indigenous peoples and communities investing in battery charging infrastructure, in the infrastructure for landing these aircraft, in training, technical training for both, because we're going to need, like, maintenance technicians are going to look different in this future. And those that are operating, perhaps once we get to a point where there is, more remotely operated, there's still an operator. And so how do we, create the conditions as we build this system for Indigenous peoples to be a part of all of it, even developing battery technology. And, there's so many other ways to be a part of it. And I'll pause there just to see what your thoughts are about like how can we be really like innovating, leading, doing the first, being the firsts, and showcasing ourselves, and then also how can this technology serve, like thinking about that intersection of how can this emerging industry, we'll say, like truly serve Indigenous peoples and communities? Like how do you see that?
I mean, the opportunity is right now we're finding applications weekly that can be used by this technology, and we are really seeing the opportunities for Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people, not only within aviation, and we can start looking outside of aviation in multiple sectors as well, because these skills are transferable, and they will be benefit to not only aviation, but resource industry, medical, emergency management, and there's so many possibilities, and we keep finding them every week. So it's really, really exciting to see how this industry is being built and how it's being developed.
Mm-hmm. Even we've spent at Iskwew Air, we spent the last here in British Columbia. I'm sure everyone has heard about the horrible flooding, and we spent 4 days helping to evacuate people out of a small airport. Because it was completely disconnected from the rest. And I thought about how advanced air mobility could really help, connect people, to get people to where they need to go in a good way. And I was wishing that we were at those times, at 2024 or 2030, but you can certainly see all the different ways that whether it's bringing supplies, whether it's, moving people, whether it's, because there's lots of different applications. And I really want us to keep that lens on, how can this technology serve? This is the question that I'm asking in my own personal research, right? Is how can this technology serve Indigenous peoples and communities? And I'm also asking specifically, how can this technology uplift Indigenous land story, sovereignty, and stewardship?
Yeah, I'm fascinated here. If you've seen photo voice assignments, which came about from anthropological research, and they give marginalized populations their own cameras. What could we do with a drone photo voice story and documenting Indigenous stories of land and place-based learning through these tools? And then additionally, the aerospace science that's required to fly the drone, which again supports the STEM, but gets them to a place of learning while they're having fun, which is when the most knowledge retention happens. So drones have an immense opportunity to support classroom learning.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Matthew, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share? I know Matthew was having a bit of technical trouble, so just wanting to check in with him there. I'm thinking about tourism, like how this technology could support tourism. I'm curious about that.
Sorry, I experienced a glitch there. I was just trying to jump in to add for that last section. I think the opportunities for myself that I would like to see within Coast Salish territory, the software development opportunities for Coast Salish youth and working adults, and maybe people who need to transition out of other sectors like forestry, fishing, or mining. We could really sell clean energy as like the next thing that can put food on the table for families, because that's usually the biggest argument from people currently working in those sectors, is that they get really angry about people who want to introduce clean energy as taking away their jobs and their family security and the opportunity to put food on their own table. So it puts us in conflict with people directly. And, so that could be one way that everybody gets to benefit.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And also, CAAM, for us at CAAM, we also very much think about integrating, right, with other technologies, and not necessarily replacing, but integrating where it makes sense, and creating opportunities for everyone. Right. What are some of the barriers? Like, I'm thinking about, we're almost co-creating a bit of a vision of what this looks like. What are some of the things that are in the way, and how do we move them out of the way? What do you think is, creating a challenge to, Indigenous peoples really seizing the opportunities that exist in advanced air mobility?
I think, when it comes to education opportunities, there's still a barrier. Like there's still some barriers to overcome in academic achievement for Indigenous people. And I think, that's again back to the trauma-informed approach. Is something that needs to be addressed, that could go a long way in reducing a lot of the barriers, I think.
Yeah, I hope that drones can help with that healing work, again, getting people out onto the land, Rocky. I've been learning as I get older, you have to spell heal first in order to spell healthy, right? And life is like that. You got to heal in order to be healthy. And again, I really feel that drones can do that. Even for me, I love going out and just putting my goggles on and flying around. It gives me just a brief space from the stress of the day, where then I can come back and get into the grind again. So, the opportunity just for a little break too is always nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, and by all means, those of you that are witnessing our conversation and joining us today, feel free to drop a question in the chat. We have one here around, do we see this industry having a role in forest fire management?
Yeah, definitely. With the air mobility, you can emergency evac people out of scenarios where you didn't have very good prudence with predicting the fire, but that's even where the drones have a better applicability. Is you can measure forest burns, you can go over into areas where forests are raging with flames and get a good documented perspective as to what's going on, and then target your fighting efforts. You can find those who have been lost in the smoke and the chaos. So, a number of different applications that we see for remote and urban firefighting.
I think I would add to that, just to expand the scope a little further, to include other natural disasters such as flooding, like what we're currently going through now. I know my tribe, we live on an island, so there could be, a tremendous contribution to monitoring river and ocean levels, as well as surveying, conducting GIS mapping, just to, analyze our forest canopy and where there's density, and, where there could be more diversity in terms of forestry development, or, fisheries monitoring for herring spawning or anything like that. It could be a lot.
We're already seeing the AAM in firefighting today, and for the past summer, we've had our PAS and drone technology doing land survey, emergency land assessment surveys of these wildfire areas. So it's just building on that and expanding the capacity, and once that capacity has been expanded, I can see multiple applications and benefits that this technology will have on both urban and rural firefighting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I can't believe, I just glanced at my watch. I can't believe that we are approaching the top of the hour already in our time together. So one of the things that I hope that we would get to, but maybe Rocky or anyone else just wants to share a couple of words around like the role of policy, strategy, and action planning as a result of what we've talked about and shared today. What are the connections there, and what's important?
I think for myself, a big focus of my work for the past year has been trying to prepare a policy space for Two-Spirit people through BC's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. I think there's a lot of groundwork already laid out in that framework about where a specific sector can go in terms of education, economic development, political participation. And I think for myself, there needs to be some clear equity measures for minority populations, such as Two-Spirit people. And I think our treatment of Two-Spirit people provides a really good indicator of how well we're implementing human rights. And so, the drum I beat is that Two-Spirit rights are human rights. So we have a human right to lead policy development. We have a human right to implement those policies, but most importantly, we have the human right to evaluate them. There aren't a whole lot of Two-Spirit people lead in policy evaluations in sectors or government, and I think that's a really important step. And opening up that space for Two-Spirit people can transform how the work is done with our heterosexual brothers and sisters, because the assumption under all of this policy work is that heteronormative is normative, male, female is normal. That's the standard you measure everybody against. And that's just not the case. We may be a small population, but we're human and we have human rights and traditional rights, inherent rights. Thank you.
Human and precious. Very precious. Precious humans. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna leave us with one last question each, and to finish our circle together. What Rocky talked about important steps. What are some important and wise steps that can be taken? Joanne.
Well, I think once we lay that groundwork and start developing policy, even when it comes to the foundational piece, I mean, I'm education based. So that's the perspective I always see things as, creating opportunities, obviously, but, how do we provide the best education possible? And with education comes a whole other responsibility of accessing education, what bridging opportunities or pathways or access to funding. I have to look at that whole area of, okay, yeah, great idea, but what, at the end of the day, after, a program or after training, what exists for that person. And that's why it's important to have forums like this and develop relationships and that nation building so people can work collaboratively, even if it is at a, entrepreneurial level, to know, where to start and who they could reach out to, other allies still, we're all doing the same thing, but it doesn't have to be like, one person doing one area. Like we have to be able to share that resource.
Right. And with our just last couple of minutes left, my next steps would be, let's flow the nutrients wisely. If this is what we really want, then let's flow the nutrients where they need to go. And last couple of words for you, Leonie.
Yes, I also come from an education background, and I completely agree with what you just shared, Joanne. I believe that in the end of the day, after the training is delivered, we do have to ask ourselves the question, how are we collaborating? Because we are developing resources and they are good quality, but how are we sharing them? If the information is out there, how can we make that information widely available for everyone? So I think that's a key point that we have to have in mind when we are working with educational resources and developing those programs for Indigenous youth, for Indigenous peoples and talents. We need to keep that thought in our minds and ask ourselves that question. So I think it's a great point.
Who else would like to share some wise and important next steps?
I'll just say that there is no treaty signed for the sky, and it is Indigenous people's inherent right to participate in the aerospace sector. And all of us here on the call today are here to hold your hand and help you with anything you need to do in that. And so please reach out to us, and really thank you for listening.
Great. Any last words or around next steps?
No, just thank you, everybody. And for next steps, just to keep this conversation going forward. The conversation doesn't end here. We're only beginning, and I'm excited to see how and where we take this technology to help uplift. Tira, I love that wording, uplift Indigenous communities and peoples.
Absolutely, absolutely. So actually, before I forget, there is a next conversation happening. Iskwew Air is hosting a conversation on December 2nd, specifically around Indigenous investment in advanced air mobility. And that is for everyone interested in supporting and uplifting Indigenous people's investment in advanced air mobility. And we haven't set a date yet, but I'm also going to have a specific conversation around the opportunities in tourism with advanced air mobility. I have my elder Jumbo is in his mid-80s. He still walks his trap line. And I would love to see technology just naturally showing him his trap line when he can no longer physically get there, and all the other immense opportunities. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And thank you to each of you who came and offered your wisdom and your ideas. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful day.